newsletter. You've seen things in national press, in local press about deer and other parts of wildlife being a problem because they are too prolific. I'd like to start with Kevin Brandt because he's going to brief us on a very exciting initiative which is, I hope, going to bear long-term fruit, particularly for the C&O Canal and the Gold Mine Loop, which I live right across the street from. And Linda has very kindly shared this example with me. When I walk the Gold Mine Loop, this is what it looks like. There's no forest understory. It's been completely destroyed. There's no habitat for birds, no habitat for small animals, and worse yet, if trees get knocked down in a storm, there are no seedlings coming up to create new forested areas. Kevin, would you, with no further, please, tell us your good news.
Well,
what are you doing about it?
Well, we're going to try, but it isn't good news yet. Let me give you a little bit of history, at least as far as I know it, and there's others from the work group who are here. The National Park Service, C&O Canal, has been participating in the deer work group here in Montgomery County. And I think each year for the last maybe 6 or more years, the recommendation has been the Park Service needs to do something about the deer that are resident in the gold mine tract, but it's not just restricted to the gold mine tract. There are deer problems up and down the canal, literally reaching all the way into Georgetown in the district. Mm-hmm. And so, we've long recognized that it was an issue we wanted to address, but for the national parks and the national park system, it's not an easy thing to come up with a plan to manage actively any species. The national parks, particularly out west, whether it's bison or grizzly bear, generally let natural processes manage the wildlife. We do that for the most part with plant species as well. And so coming up with an approach to actively manage any kind of species is a tall order. And so where you've seen parks undertake an effort to get a handle on that, it has always involved an environmental impact statement. And environmental impact statements, at least in the case of managing deer, often cost 7 figures, often take 5 years or more to complete, and are really staff intensive for the staff of the park. Even when you're hiring a consultant, the staff at the individual park, it takes literally hundreds and hundreds of hours to work with the consultant, work with the communities, work with all the interested parties. And so, because of the cost, there's been a limited amount of resources nationally available for individual parks to come up with deer management plans. The first one that is in the National Capital Region, and that includes parks from Catoctin Mountain in the north to Prince William Forest Park in the south. We kind of are on the far western extreme out at Cumberland. Includes parks like National Capital Parks East, Greenbelt, and other parks in between. But the first park to put together a deer management plan was Catoctin Mountain Park. I think one of your handouts that you had made reference to 400 deer per square mile. I think that's something in the neighborhood of what they had up at Catoctin. But it took them, I think, more than 5 years from when they first started to the time they had a finding of no significant impact. Actually, it was a record of decision for an EIS. And it didn't provide them with the funds to actually implement the plan. Rock Creek Park, Gettysburg National Military Park also have recently completed plans. To my knowledge, none of the parks received any additional funding on a sustained basis to actually implement the actions that were in the plan. They've had to cut back in other areas of their park management in order to implement it. But from what I'm told by the superintendent of Catoctin Mountain Park, they have done deer reductions there, and it is improving the quality of the understory and other measurements that they have for the success or failure of the program. Because there have been so many plans that have been done in fairly close proximity, because in addition to Catoctin Rock Creek, and Gettysburg. Most recently, Manassas, Monocacy, and Antietam battlefields completed a deer management plan. Pretty much the same kind of environment as the first several. Somewhat similar to the kind of environment that we have here at the C&O Canal. And so Rebecca Harriet, the superintendent of Harpers Ferry National Historical Park, and I got together and with our regional office have been able to put up a little bit of money. It's not enough to fully fund the study, but based on the recommendation of our national office that makes recommendations on this, we're going to initiate, or try to initiate, an environmental assessment to develop a deer management plan. Now we're closing in on the final days of fiscal year 14 in the federal government. The office out in Denver that will manage the contract is still negotiating with a consultant in order to award and obligate that money. So it's not a sure thing yet that we're going to be able to do this. But if they are successful here in the next week or 10 days to award this contract, then it's probably sometime in late October or early November, we would launch an environmental assessment in the first step towards developing a deer management plan for both parks. It would cover the entirety of the C&O Canal. It would cover the entirety of Harpers Ferry National Historical Park as well. In both cases, we're going to look at the full range of approaches. They're probably the same approaches that have been studied in every other environmental impact statement. I personally don't know of anything new, but we'll probably kick it off in both parks more or less the same time. We'll probably have public scoping meetings at which people can come and offer their comments, make suggestions on how we might manage deer. We'll certainly be taking comments on the kind of impacts you think are created by the abundance of deer that are out there now. And then we'll go through the process of documenting the kind of landscape and environment that the deer are impacting and look at the alternatives. And we'll present that as a draft environmental assessment and get public feedback at that point. So there'll be a number of points throughout the process for public engagement and involvement, and we certainly want that. I think in every one of the cases where an environmental impact statement has been done, there has been a lot of controversy on the part of the public. Should we do something? Should we not do something? If you do something, what should it be? And of course, at the end of the day, it can come up with whatever solution is approved through the process. Neither park currently has funds to fully implement it. And so that'll have to be another strategy that gets developed at the end of that process. But I live in the community. I don't live in Montgomery County, but I live in southern Frederick County on a farm. And on any given evening, you can see a small herd of 25 to probably 40 deer, running through the farm. And so you don't have to go very far to see that there are a lot of deer out there. And so, I've been hearing a lot of comments, not just tonight, for many, many years, and know that this is a subject of great interest here in Montgomery County. Yes, sir?
First question. If these environmental impact assessments are being done and then there's no funds to implement them, for how long does that environmental impact assessment stay live and can be relied upon? Or does it get to the stage where if the money's not available for another 5 or 10 years, then you turn around and say, oh, well, now that's out of date, you've got to do another study?
Generally, unless circumstances significantly change, they're good for at least 5 years. Now, if something happened, chronic wasting disease, it's out further in western Maryland and West Virginia, but I don't know of any documented cases in this area. And so if something like that were documented in the herd that wasn't a part of the analysis at this point in time, even after 1 year, there might be a need to go back and redo it. But ordinarily, 5+ years is kind of the life of a plan. Now, if we've implemented something and are underway, we don't need to stop and redo something, again, unless there's some significant change.
I have a question. Excuse me.
Yeah, I write a lot of, or work on a lot of environmental assessments and EISs. And I know I had done some for the Army where we were doing integrated natural resource management plans. And we streamlined the process and saved cost by having the EA and the resource management plan be one document that went out for public review. Is that allowed at the Park Service?
We have something called a resource management plan, but it's typically not done specifically
Right.
for a single topic.
But is it, would it be possible to have your deer management plan go out in one document as the with the EA
Yes.
covering the,
Yes.
to streamline the process? And
I understand your question
Yeah.
now. Yes, we would put the management plan in with the environmental impact analysis. Yeah, so that would go out together.
How long do you anticipate the assessment to take?
Typically, when people come to us and ask us, they want some development or some potential impact in the park, if it requires an environmental assessment, we typically say a year plus. I think it would not surprise me if this takes at least 18 months because of the fact that we're doing 2 parks, we're doing it across 185 miles length of the canal. Just for our park, we'll probably do something, public meetings here in Montgomery County. We may, if we think that we're contemplating something out in Washington or Frederick County, we may have another public meeting out there. But certainly they'll have a public meeting for each of these rounds in Harper's Ferry so that we've got good community engagement. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just not sure why you say there are not enough funds available to implement the plan. And here's the reason why. There are conservationist owners who will do it for free and will do it within state and county laws and will give the venison to soup kitchens. Feed the poor. Now, I don't see any funds that need to be available to do it.
Well, you're presupposing that that's the alternative that is selected through the process. It may not be the alternative that is selected.
But if the Park Service is worried about funds, I would presume that to be the best method of lowering the deer density.
Well, the National Environmental Policy Act requires us to pick the environmentally preferable alternative, not the alternative that costs the least. And that may sound like a little bit of an oxymoron, but that's the way the law reads. And so even though the outcome might be an alternative that is more expensive, if it's prohibitively expensive, that could be a reason for discounting that alternative. But if there's a zero-cost alternative and one that costs $100 or whatever you might imagine, something that is more than I've got in my budget, that alone is not a reason for picking between 2 alternatives.
However, we need to take into consideration you have to take into consideration the safety issues for the public. And a big safety issue is that any other method, shooting the deer is a much longer, guns has a much longer range than the 40 feet going straight down into the deer that are baited. I still don't see why there is an issue for not having the funds and the environmental integrity to do what it needs to be done.
Kevin, could it be that something in the law needs to be amended or tweaked to make this kind of approach more doable?
Well, we all live close enough to Washington, D.C. We know how many laws are getting modified or passed in Congress.
And we're used to bugging our representatives.
Well, you are good at that. I'll give you that. Those are the kind of comments that we would like to hear at the onset of this process, and that'll be your opportunity to make sure that we hear those and we include them in our analysis at the scoping phase. And then the process, continues through there. But I'm sure we're going to get, other ideas, some which may not work, some which may. But Yeah, I think those are, perfectly valid ideas.
All right, I'm going to let two more hands be recognized and then move on to the other presenters. Gentleman in the far back has had his hand up a long time.
I'm sympathetic to your problem. I was a vet for 42 years, but what I found was that you can often sort of shorten these cycles by using things like Xerox machines. And nobody knew nor cared because a large hump was already studied and it was all applicable across the field. The process you're describing here can take so many years that those trees in that gold mine tract are going to be stubs. You're going to study it, you're going to finish studying it, you're going to figure out how to take care of the deer, however it may be, even if it is bow hunters. And by that time, the current catastrophe will be a double disaster. There has to be in your agency's regs ways of making legitimate speed-ups in a process that we all know is lethargic, at least as you have described it. It's not acceptable.
Well, that's why we're doing an environmental assessment instead of an environmental impact statement.
And that's 18 months or plus.
The environmental assessment process takes 12 to 18 months. The environmental impact statement process that has been used in these other processes, other parts, is the one that has taken 5 years plus in some cases.
So it's a fast track.
So we're doing exactly what you've described.
No, what I'm describing is something that gets the job done before it's too late, and you're not.
Alan?
And you may think that you're bound by it, but you are not the lawyer in the office who knows how to, or is willing to do this.
All right, last question for this presenter, Alan, please.
So you mentioned earlier that 400 deer per square mile was no significant impact. Is that a metric which is out there?
No.
Did I confuse that?
No, that was a number that was in a sheet that I think you guys are providing out on the table.
Right.
I don't know exactly what the number was at Catoctin, and off the top of my head, I don't know what the number is, say, at Gold Mine Tract. We do have many years of records of that. I don't, off the top of my head, know what that number
That
is.
seems to be a pretty high threshold of no
Right,
significant.
it's unsustainable, unacceptable. And I'm going to ask our next presenters to come on up because perhaps they can address that question of how many deer is too many deer, much better than I can. All right, they've introduced themselves and I'm not going to come up with any long-winded introductions because I want this presentation to go on. We've got Bill Hamilton and Ryan Butler from the County Parks Department. They're both wildlife ecologists and work on the deer management work group. Also, Paul Pedito and George Timko from Maryland's State Department of Natural Resources, also involved with wildlife management. So if all four of them could come up, I will leave it to you four to work out who's presenting what and where. Yeah, you should be able to sit down. You just
All you say a few words, we invite you to start us off. If you speak on behalf of everyone.
And if you have questions and you need clarification on a given point, by all means, raise your hand at that point. If you have really big, juicy questions, let's save them for the dialogue after the presentation.
And I would suggest also that you save your questions for later. We have a variety of experts here around the table. And while I'm certain you've come loaded for bear with a few questions, we'll probably cover some of that information as we move through the presentation. I want to thank the Civic Federation for arranging for us to join together and start this conversation. It sounds from introductions that many of you, if not all, are no stranger to deer and the impacts that they have created throughout the county. I'm here tonight representing the Deer Management Work Group for Montgomery County, which in January will begin its 20th year addressing deer and deer impacts in the county and on behalf of the county. Several of the panelists here are members of that group, including Kevin and others from C&O Canal.
What's your name?
Bill Hamilton. I am a wildlife ecologist. I head the wildlife ecology unit for Montgomery Parks, and I'm a member of the Montgomery County Deer Management Board. Already has- While deer have been a problem here in Montgomery County for 20 years, this is a problem relatively new to the region and to the country by and large. It's never been experienced before. Following World War II, with the baby boom and suburbanization development throughout Montgomery County and other large cities throughout the country, we started to see this problem of interaction amongst citizens and our wildlife. And we've kind of created the problem on our own. But what do we do in the event when we create one problem, we have to fix it, so we meddle a little more. But this is something that's been festering for 60, 70 years, and it's just been growing. And we're now at an inflection point where our citizens are finding that they just can't sustain it anymore. They're not willing to put up with the hassles. Montgomery County's Deer Management Work Group was tasked with creating a comprehensive management plan for the county. That management plan was created in 1995. It was introduced to the public in the fall of 1995 with a series of public meetings. DNR partaked in that, Montgomery Parks partaked in that, and other large government agencies. We presented a plan with 16 alternatives and asked from the public how they wanted to see management proceed throughout the county. And to date, through all of those 20 years, we've continued to progress in the manner that the citizens suggested. Here are some of our impacts. It's not lost on you. We've got landscape damage that many of you have sustained. We've got agricultural damage to the county. I think someone said billions of dollars. We're estimating millions in this county annually. And something that we focus on is public safety. Deer droppings. I know a lot of people look at Lyme disease as being a key public safety issue. We're getting more deer droppings complaints than anything in the county. And the reality is there is a concern. They're loaded with bacteria, E. coli, salmonella, others. And people are worried about their pets and their children and themselves interacting with deer droppings in their yards, in their parks, and so on. This is a map of the last year's deer vehicle collisions in Montgomery County. 2,041 accidents.
Reported.
Reported. We don't really know how many total, but it's a good indicator. Obviously, $3,000 to $5,000 per accident. It's an economic damage, and people are being injured and killed in these accidents as well. We've set forth with a management plan that started with data collection. There's still a lot to learn about deer impacts in Montgomery County and other areas. And before you can act on something, you need to understand it. And while I can report that we've made a lot of progress, there's still a lot that we need to know. But we started with focusing on our public safety concern at the time, which was deer vehicle collisions. And in 1995, when we collected our first round of information, the county reported 196 deer accidents. We knew right from the get-go that that was underreported and that we needed to improve things. And we had Mr. Bill Wilhelm, who was an officer in Montgomery County Police, began sorting through hand records that officers were submitting at the time whenever they would deal with a deer struck by a vehicle. Thanks to technology and thanks to the Deer Management Work Group's pushing of collecting new data, we've actually gotten GIS records now. There are mobile data terminals in everybody's vehicle. So all of these reports have been greatly improved, which brings us to the 2,041 that we're reporting today. We started to identify hazardous roadways in the county. We've actually had our county police put out road signs educating the public of when deer damage occurs, when public safety is at its greatest, and when you need to be aware and on what roadways. Unfortunately, as the map indicates, it's far spread. We started to quantify impacts to natural areas. Kevin Brandt suggested the EIS. We did a variety of browse impacts and vegetation impacts. You can see the photo to the left over here. That's an indicator of some of the damage that deer do to the environment. we needed to get a grasp on what actually was happening in our parks and in our communities. And then we started a clearinghouse. There used to be an APHIS number. USDA was collecting all of the county's deer complaints. That's been disbanded, and now DNR and Montgomery Parks is taking the volume of deer concerns and complaints in the county. We went through a variety of outreach. We need the public to understand what we're dealing with, what deer impacts result in, how many deer should there be. Originally, we put a variety of media into our public libraries. We started a traveling road show. As you might expect, much of this is web-based now. We've got a lot of information on this parksdeermanagement.org site. The Department of Natural Resources has a lot of information on their website as well. We attend meetings like this to share information, to hear from the public and what they want. And we produce an annual report. As a matter of fact, this annual deer report from the Deer Management Work Group was released today, and that also is available on our website there, parksdeermanagement.org. That goes through a state of affairs for the past year. It details where citizen complaint was received, what we're doing as an agency, and as a work group. We've had a volume of mitigation. This is non-lethal mitigation. These are all ICC pictures, which is, this is the best example that I can come up with. Many of you may not really be fans of the ICC, but it was the first case in Montgomery County from development to implementation and construction where the Deer Management Work Group and Montgomery Parks was able to implement strategies to reduce deer vehicle collisions. And just a couple, this is a planning concept drawing of a wildlife underpass in the Northwest Branch corridor. And this is the same underpass following construction as it is today. We developed strategies, costly, to allow safe wildlife passage under the roadway. This is just another example of a wildlife passage which benefits deer and other animals. This is one of, This is one of the other mitigation techniques. This allows deer that get onto the roadway in some manner to get off. You can see the fence line here. It's at a lower grade on the interior of the road. If they were to get up here somehow, it gives them an easy way to jump back on. What we're learning is that a lot of these animals get onto the highways like 270, I-495, they get discombobulated, they can't find a way off, and that is actually what causes an accident. Facility protection. Frankly, we have some facilities in Montgomery County in our government that are not appropriate for deer. We have a zero tolerance policy. But it's unfair in an environment where deer are going to be allowed to live that we are unwilling to put up with their impacts. This is a fence that was constructed around the Brookside Botanical Gardens in Wheaton Regional Park. And I use this view in particular because the fence is a $400,000 structure. It consists of this high fence, chain link, ornamental iron, and deer cattle guards that allows the traffic in and out. And to date, it's been very effective. It was expensive. We have routine failures of the gates and fencing, but by and large, over the last 15 years, we've been able to keep deer out of that facility. And we've used similar designs around some of our other nurseries and buildings and facilities. The County Deer Management Work Group was able to work with our legislators in the county to change regulations to fencing restrictions. At the time, you could not have a fence over 6 feet in height in the county, and the setbacks were causing problems for deer fencing that was high enough to restrict access. And we were able to change the regulation to allow this deer fencing that is an invisible mesh. Actually, you can see a little white flag that's placed on the fence there so that deer can actually see it and not run through it, and other animals such as birds. But these are just a couple of examples of techniques that we've been able to employ in the county of invisible fencing. This is actually not an invisible fence, but when people think of fencing, they automatically jump to the conclusion that it's going to be ugly and intrusive. And this was a creative design by somebody who was able to make quite an attractive term. Yes, sir.
What's the height allowed of that special deer fence mesh?
It's 8 foot. And that the manufacturer, the regulation was changed to meet the manufacturer's
that
standard.
thing.
Correct. It's very specific to that. We began protecting our resources as well. We have some of the strictest forest conservation laws in the country, but we were finding that after our planting, anytime you break soil in Montgomery County, you have to replace plants. But we were finding an absence of deer protection or inappropriate deer protection, that those plants were being decimated shortly thereafter being planted. So about 3 years ago, we implemented stricter planting requirements for our development, which requires a 4 to 6 foot in height protection of caging and a 2-year maintenance on that tree. So after 2 years, they're responsible to make sure that each and every tree survives. It reduces the amount of browse available to deer. It secures the likelihood that those species are going to propagate and be successful. I would note that as we started securing a lot of our green space in Montgomery County and some of the secondary succession and reforestation that was created in Montgomery County during the early 1990s and throughout the 1990s, that's one of the reasons that deer populations blossomed the way they did. There was such a large volume of habitat and food available to them. And I imagine that some of this protection will begin to restrict that and limit the growth. This is a picture very similar to the one that was presented from River Falls and the Ciano Canal. This is a deer exposure actually protecting a rare, threatened, and endangered plant community. As we've located some of these communities and realized the impact that deer has on them, we've been able to protect them. And you can see that the underbrush inside of that fence is flourishing, whereas outside it's struggling. Population management. I mentioned our series of public meetings that occurred in the fall of 1995. The first thing that our public wanted was for us to utilize existing hunting regulations and encourage increased harvest in Montgomery County. And the Deer Management Work Group worked with the Maryland State Department of Natural Resources to begin to change some of the seasons and bag limits to actually increase the harvest throughout the county. And I think their data has suggested it's been very effective. But I've just outlined some of the changes to the normal hunting harvest regulations that have occurred since 1995. And you can see here, unlimited antlerless deer started in the archery season. We moved on to unlimited antlerless deer in every hunting season. They extended the firearm season by 2 days in January. There's been Sunday hunting dates extended, much to the credit of groups like yours who have reached out to your legislators and representatives. And in the last 5 years, we've had a deregulation of county weapons discharge for the gun. We've reduced the firearms discharge regulations from 200 yards to 150 and also reduced some of the road distances. And just recently, we deregulated archery from 150 yards to 100. So there's been a continual progress to encouraging the harvest of some of these surplus deer. We've been promoting effective deer management on private lands. We've reached out to the agriculturalists. We've met with groups like yours. There's a variety of hunting groups that we've met with to encourage increased antlerless harvest, to reaching out to some of the communities that need help. I think there's representatives from Leisure World here. We've met with Leisure World on several occasions, as has DNR, to try to assist them to get something moving. Maybe most prominently, we've increased deer population management on much of our public lands, and I've noted just a few here. Maryland National Capital Park and Planning lands, county land, Seneca Creek State Park, and a variety of Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission lands have all implemented deer management. In 1995, when we published the comprehensive management plan, public hunting was allowed on these 3 locations throughout Montgomery County, highlighted in green. It attributed for roughly 5,000 acres of our public lands. And here we are 20 years later, and we've increased public deer management on all of these lands, highlighted in green. I will note that the ones highlighted in yellow are proposed for this year. The county council has supported those actions. We just need to move out to the public and get some public comment on those. We've gone from 5,000 public lands under deer management to roughly 30,000 acres of public lands under deer management in the 20 years since we implemented the comprehensive management plan. How many deer? Question of the day, right? Our council asked us that in the last budget session. And the answer is, John Hadidian from the Humane Society of the United States has always said, how many are you willing to tolerate? And that's the reality. 400 deer per square mile, we've experienced that in Montgomery County. We've experienced 200 deer per square mile. There's a wide variety, and every community is different and willing to put up with different things. And there's a variety of land use objectives, and they all recommend different densities. But what I will tell you is that we've come to believe that 30 deer per square mile or less is the desirable, achievable level in Montgomery County. It's not exactly enough to guarantee that Lyme disease is going to be eradicated from the landscape. It's not exactly enough to guarantee that our forests are going to be blossoming and flourishing forevermore. But it is a sound number where our citizen complaint has been demonstrated to go down, our deer vehicle collisions have been demonstrated to go down, and we're seeing some benefits to the ecosystem. Yes, sir.
Could you just clarify, if we restrict the number of deer in this area, to what extent do they wander around and spread?
They're a migratory species, and they spread out to find new habitat, depending on the sex of the animal, the age of the animal, but they will find the best habitat. And you'll often read that deer have a 1 square mile home range. The reality is that home range changes over time, and they find seasonally where the best food sources are available and where their best realm of survival is. So deer do move. If you're familiar, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has been doing a contraception experiment in their facility in Gaithersburg. All the deer in that location are tagged, and we've had deer found in the Dulles area of Virginia with tags on them, Shady Grove, all over the county. So they're getting upwards of 15 miles away from the site which they were tagged. Yes, ma'am.
I go back to your last slide. I noticed that all those green areas where current deer population management are in like an agricultural area, or like in Albany, or on the eastern part. There's this huge area in the southern part of the county where there is no deer management going on. And that borders the Potomac River. And also, it borders the watershed that goes into the Potomac for our drinking water.
Well, I will cover that a little bit as my presentation moves on. What I would suggest is, without throwing Kevin under the bus, much of the land along the Potomac River obviously is under the auspices of C&O Canal National Park. So as a county agency and as a county deer management work group, we have no authority over that. They have a whole other level of authority that they need to answer to with the environmental impacts. Did you have a follow-up?
Yes. There are lots of little pocket parks throughout that area.
Yeah, I'll cover that a little bit as I progress. I mentioned 30 deer per square mile. In late 1990s, the Maryland DNR actually did a flight of central Maryland, and at that time they estimated a 60 deer per square mile average, and that's not too far off from what we experience in Montgomery County on average. We're finding anywhere from 60 to 75 in our county. Now, as was suggested, we see it much higher in some of those locations. We've got some deer densities that we've managed to bring down to roughly 15 at its lowest, and others that go as high as 125 that we've demonstrated. For those of you in the River Falls area, I know I heard a few of you, we actually, after speaking to your constituents for many years and the county council, they approved an investigation during this last budget cycle. We just completed our first evaluation of the deer population in that area. Our staff implemented a camera survey using infrared cameras over a 500-acre parcel called Rock Run Stream Valley Park. And we just recently completed that. We estimated 78 to 97 deer in that region, and that equates to roughly 100 to 125 deer per square mile. Now what you will see, this is an extremely narrow stream valley. bordered by dense development all around. There's very little legal hunting that can go on there. We are willing to work with the community. We're reaching out to the community and trying to figure out what can be done. But it's not as simple as you might like. It's logistically complex.
I have a question.
Yes,
Why do you limit the management of deer to antlerless?
we don't limit it, but by and large, if you're trying to reduce a deer population, you want to focus on antlerless deer. They're the reproductive
The does.
focus of population growth. So if you can take one doe out of the herd, you're potentially taking 2 or 3 animals out of the future.
Take them, but if you take the,
You know?
Take the bucks out, you're
It was
gonna
always
limit
the
the
bucks.
deer.
And keep the girls from getting pregnant. I don't understand.
As an agency, we don't focus only on antlerless deer. We do allow antlerless deer in all of our programs, but we do want people to be taking more deer out than just bucks. The council's in asking how many deer are appropriate. We've always focused on parkland. Our budgets go directly into the general fund of Montgomery Parks, and to date, we've focused on areas where we manage and where we need to keep tabs on deer populations closely. So we've kind of been absent about how many deer are throughout Montgomery County. This year, we're implementing a 75 square mile deer survey, and as you can see, they're kind of south, east, and central in the county. We're hoping to get a better grasp on what the landscape level deer population is. Are they focused in parks or are they spread throughout the county? I expect this will begin sometime after leaf fall of this year, and we'll probably have data available in the spring of the year.
So those are 3 25 square mile parks?
That's correct.
And how do you do that?
That will be done by a contractor from aerial reconnaissance using forward-looking infrared. So what have we learned in our deer population management efforts? Well, first and foremost that might interest you is deer densities. When deer densities are decreased around our parks, deer vehicle collisions are decreased. We've been able to utilize our GIS to evaluate these, and here's just some numbers. We estimated that when evaluating deer vehicle collisions within 1/4 mile of parks, that on unmanaged properties, 52% of deer vehicle collisions in the county occur within 1/4 mile of parks, and on managed properties, that drops to 12%. And we also went out to 1/2 mile, and you can see similar, 76.9% of deer vehicle collisions in the county occur within 1/2 mile of a park. But on managed properties, that drops significantly. So essentially, we can reduce deer vehicle collisions by 2/3 when managing populations effectively. One interesting number here, 85% of deer vehicle collisions in Montgomery County occur in the urban zone. And that roughly equates to the agricultural reserve. It's the highly developed area, and there's some weapons discharge. Yeah, there.
Should be rural zone, shouldn't it?
Yeah. That doesn't make sense, it's backwards.
If you can see this, this blue line here? This blue line delineates the urban zone, which is this area of the county. In 1989 or 1990, the county delineated the urban zone to restrict weapons discharge in the county.
Oh.
The Montgomery County Police and the Weapons Board decided that it was unsafe. And this is kind of one of the reasons that deer populations grew in that area so much, is because hunting was shunned in those areas to some extent. So yeah, it's this area, 85% of deer vehicle collisions occur within the urban zone.
But is bow hunting restricted in that zone?
No, you can discharge a bow. Now, as I mentioned, until recently, there were much stricter requirements. You had to be 50 yards from any roadway, 150 yards from a home, and there may have been some others. They're starting to reduce that as citizens like yourselves call for more action. Yes, ma'am.
There are also some public lands that have very high deer densities that are not managed by the park system. There are 3,200 acres managed by the Montgomery County Public Schools as conservation areas. These are unbuilt school areas, and all we have to do is get permission from the conservation areas, which are 8 acres or more, and are within the bow hunting range of that conservation.
I understand there are a lot of public lands that are undeveloped at this point, and they are certainly harboring sanctuary for deer. And as you pointed out, the public schools is one. We just recently responded to a request of a citizen who wanted to bow hunt a park, and it turned out that the vast majority of that park was actually school property and others. In this case, it was Metro Transit property. And these undeveloped properties, they allow for deer to take up sanctuary. I will note, though, that it's not as simple as you might like. All of these programs cost money. Me being here tonight, it costs money. The public schools does not have anybody dedicated to address these issues. And it can be
I have the name of that person.
Did they just recently ask them to do
I've
that?
been emailing them.
Okay, well, I think that it's important, and I'll mention it in my slideshow, but it's important to identify these locations where deer continue to take sanctuary, where legal deer management can occur, and to see how we can progress towards allowing some. But we've gotten the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. 30,000 acres. It's been progressive. We started with a very conservative approach to get deer population management accepted in this community. When I started this program in 1995, we had better than 50%, or roughly 50-50, that didn't want to hear anything about deer hunting in Montgomery County. Now the tide has turned as it's become to impact more people, particularly in southern and eastern Montgomery County. But I give a lot of credit to our agency and to the work group for having done a reputable job of implementing safe management.
I need to interject and say we're going to have to wrap this up in half an hour, and I want time for the state's DNR representatives to speak. So if we could go a little faster and hold off on your questions, please.
Certainly, I'm getting there anyway. Moving forward, we've picked the low-hanging fruit. We have some complex issues ahead of us, and it's good for groups like this that are active within the community with their legislators and representatives to have this discussion. I do ask, to define the complexity of the issue. It's logistically difficult to see these through, but we're trying to work with you. So let's work together and move forward on this problem. I still think deer are going to be a part of this environment. The numbers that we want to move down to, 30 deer per square mile. A square mile is a large area. We're experiencing 125. Kevin Brandt mentioned 25 to 40 on his southern Frederick County farm as being small group. Well, that's more than we recommend for the average square mile. So citizens are going to have to find some tolerance, and I think that once the frustrations get by, that will occur. We need to expand population management in communities. There's a lot of land out there, as you've mentioned, Leisure World, golf courses that haven't gotten into this action yet. And we need to work to identify those and to get them on board with doing something. You guys have been effective to engage the C&O Canal into this discussion last year, and we're making headway. We need to expand population into remaining legal parcels. I think, yeah. I think that there is hope. Predation is high now. We've got hunters. There's practically been a bounty placed on deer in this county. We've got hunters that are being demanded to do more. We have deer vehicle collisions. We've got a growing coyote population in this county that we're seeing, and that's probably what I'm going to be dealing with next, to be honest. Yeah. But there is a silver lining. There is a silver lining. Sooner or later, all things are cyclical, and this too will pass. It's going to come a day when this isn't a daily discussion. Sooner or later, they'll deplete their resources. As much as we want forests to survive forever, they're built to die. These pictures, that's not abnormal. In our lifetime, a forest structure might take 150 to 200 years to go from birth to death, and we haven't seen that. We're antsy. We want it to be idealistic, the way we envision it. In reality, they're not going to sustain themselves forever, no matter how hard we try. And when that occurs,